Derbyshire, England, April 1816. The rain fell in relentless sheets across the grounds of Lenox Hall, turning the gravel drive into a river of grey stone and streaming water. Through the downpour, a modest travelling coach approached the great house, its wheels churning mud. Its single occupant clutching a worn reticule as though it contained her last shred of dignity. Lady Theodora Winfield pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, watching the mansion emerge from the mist like a fortress built to keep out warmth and light. Jacobean towers rose against the storm-dark sky, their windows reflecting nothing but emptiness. This was to be her home now, her prison more accurately, purchased with her father's debts and her mother's desperate tears. The marriage contract lay folded in her reticule, signed just 3 days prior in a London solicitor's office that smelled of dust and broken promises. The Earl of Lennox had not even attended the signing. His man of business had done it all, clinical and efficient, as though purchasing a broodmare rather than acquiring a wife. If stories of love that rises from the ashes of grief move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. The coach door opened, and Theodora stepped down into ankle-deep mud, her traveling dress immediately soaked. No servants rushed forward with umbrellas, no housekeeper waited at the door with welcoming smiles. The great oak doors of Lenox Hall remained firmly closed against her arrival. She stood in the rain for a full minute before a thin, elderly butler finally appeared, his expression suggesting he had opened the door to admit an unpleasant odor rather than the new Countess of Lennox. "Lady Winfield," he said, the deliberate omission of her new title cutting like a blade. "His lordship is in the library. He will see you at his convenience." The entrance hall swallowed her footsteps as she followed the butler's rigid back through corridors lined with portraits of Valmont ancestors who seemed to judge her with painted eyes. Everywhere she looked, fresh flowers filled Chinese vases, white roses, exclusively white roses, their perfume cloying and oppressive. "The late Countess's favourite," the butler said without turning. "His lordship maintains a mourning calendar in his study, my lady. He does not permit a single day to pass unmarked." Theodora remained silent. What words could exist for this truth? That her dying mother's face haunted her dreams with the same relentlessness that his dead wife's memory haunted these halls? The library doors opened to reveal a room of such masculine beauty it momentarily stole her breath. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of leather-bound volumes, their spines gleaming in the firelight. Persian carpets softened the marble floors. The air carried the scent of old paper and beeswax candles, yet beneath the beauty, a subtle chill emanated from the marble beneath the carpets, a reminder that the room's elegance did not extend to warmth. The man standing before the fire invited nothing but distance. Garrett Valmont, Earl of Lennox, turned to face her with the slow deliberation of someone performing an unpleasant duty. He was taller than she had expected, his dark hair silvering slightly at the temples, his grey eyes holding all the warmth of a January frost. He wore mourning black despite 3 years having passed, a deliberate statement that needed no words. "Lady Winfield," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of Eton and Oxford. "I trust your journey was not too uncomfortable." The formal words, spoken without a trace of actual concern, set the tone for everything that would follow. "The rain was quite severe, my lord," Theodora replied, maintaining her composure despite her sodden appearance. "But I have arrived safely, which is all that matters." "Indeed," he gestured to a chair but did not wait to see if she sat. "I believe we should establish the terms of this arrangement immediately. Clarity prevents misunderstanding, and I have no patience for the latter." Theodora lowered herself into the chair, her spine straight despite exhaustion. She had learned composure in a harsh school, watching creditors dismantle her childhood home piece by piece, nursing her mother through lung fever in rooms grown cold from lack of coal, accepting this marriage as the only alternative to complete destitution. "I am listening, my lord," she said quietly. Garrett moved to his desk, retrieving a document written in his own hand. He did not sit, standing as though proximity to her required additional distance. "First," he began, his tone suggesting he was reviewing a business contract, "you will have your own chambers in the East Wing. I occupy rooms in the West. We will maintain separate households within this house. She nodded once. Second, you will not redecorate, rearrange, or otherwise alter any space in this house without my explicit permission. Everything here is arranged as my late wife preferred, and I will not have her memory disturbed. I would not presume, Theodora began, but he continued as though she had not spoken. Third, you will not expect or request my presence at social functions. I no longer attend balls, routs, or any gathering of the ton. You may accept invitations if you wish, though I imagine few will be forthcoming once society understands the nature of our arrangement. The cruelty of that statement, casually delivered, utterly accurate, landed like a physical blow. But Theodora kept her expression neutral. Fourth, you will provide me with an heir. This is, after all, the sole purpose of this marriage from my perspective. Once you have fulfilled that duty, we need have minimal contact. He delivered these words with the same inflection one might use to discuss crop rotation. Theodora felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the humiliation of being reduced to such a mercenary transaction. Do you understand these terms? He asked, finally meeting her eyes directly. In that moment, Theodora saw not cruelty but something worse, complete emptiness. The man before her was not trying to hurt her. He simply did not care enough to try anything at all. I understand perfectly, my lord, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Might I add one term of my own? His eyebrows rose slightly, the first hint of any expression at all. You may speak. I ask only that you permit me to write to my mother weekly and to visit her in Bath once per quarter. She is quite ill, and I am all she has left in this world. For a moment something flickered across his features, perhaps recognition of another person's grief, perhaps merely impatience to conclude this interview. You may write as often as you wish, he said. As for visits, inform Henderson when you intend to travel and appropriate arrangements will be made. I will not accompany you. I would not expect you to, my lord. Then we understand each other. He returned the document to his desk. Henderson will show you to your chambers. Dinner is served at 8. I generally dine in my study, so you will have the dining room to yourself. Good day, Lady Winfield. The dismissal was absolute. Theodora rose, curtsied with perfect propriety, and followed Henderson back into the corridor. She did not look back, though she felt Garrett's eyes on her retreating form, not with interest, but with the same regard one might give a problem temporarily solved, but fundamentally unwelcome. Her chambers were beautiful in an impersonal way. Decorated in blues and creams, they overlooked the eastern gardens, which even through the rain showed signs of careful planning and long neglect. A fire burned in the grate, and her meager belongings had already been unpacked by silent, efficient hands. Martha, her lady's maid, the only servant who had agreed to come with her from London, bustled in with a tea tray, her round face creased with concern. "Oh, my lady," she whispered, "what a cold welcome. The staff here talk of nothing but the First Lady Lennox, as though she were a saint descended from heaven itself." Theodora sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Then I shall have to prove myself through actions rather than words, Martha. What else can I do?" "You could have refused this marriage," Martha said boldly, then immediately looked stricken. "Forgive me, my lady, I speak out of turn." "No," Theodora replied softly. "You speak the truth. But refusing would have meant my mother dying alone in a charity hospital, myself seeking employment as a governess, if I could find any family willing to overlook my father's scandal. This way, at least, I can ensure Mama has comfort in her final months. My happiness is a small price to pay for her peace." That night, Theodora dined alone in a dining room that could seat 40, served by footmen who looked through her rather than at her. The food was excellent, but everything tasted like ash. Afterward, she wrote the first of what would become many letters to her mother, carefully editing out anything that might cause worry. She wrote of the beautiful house, the extensive library, the comfort of her chambers. She wrote that Lord Lennox was a reserved gentleman of good character, which was true as far as it went. She wrote that she sent all her love, that she would visit as soon as proper. When she finally slept, exhausted by emotion more than physical exertion, Theodora dreamed of drowning in a sea of white roses, their petals filling her mouth and lungs, while a dark-haired man watched from shore, making no move to save her. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed overnight. Theodora woke early and dressed with Martha's help in a simple morning gown of dove grey. She had learned during her father's decline that mourning shades suited a woman in ambiguous social positions, not quite grieving, not quite celebrating, simply existing in the undefined space between. Henderson appeared at her door precisely at 9 to inquire about her breakfast preferences. "I will take breakfast in the morning room if that is acceptable," Theodora said pleasantly, "and I wonder if you might provide me with a tour of the house and grounds today. I should like to understand my new home." The butler's expression suggested he found the term home presumptuous, but he bowed correctly. "As your ladyship wishes. I shall conduct the tour at 10 o'clock if that suits." "Perfectly, thank you, Henderson." Breakfast was another solitary affair, though the morning room offered a pleasant view of the gardens. Theodora ate slowly, observing the grounds with interest. The formal gardens nearest the house showed impeccable maintenance. Every hedge trimmed, every path swept, every bed weeded. But beyond them, she could see what appeared to be a walled garden, its iron gate hanging askew, its interior wild with neglect. Something about that abandoned space called to her, something in that neglected place, a skeleton of beauty beneath chaos, mirrored the feeling in her own chest. It was a space that, like herself, waited to be rediscovered. Henderson proved an informative, if thoroughly disapproving guide. He showed her through reception rooms furnished with exquisite taste, a music room whose pianoforte clearly had not been played in years, a conservatory filled with exotic plants, and finally, the portrait gallery. Lady Eleanor Valmont gazed down from a dozen canvases, her beauty undeniable. Fair where Theodora was dark, delicate where Theodora was sturdy, she possessed an ethereal quality that seemed designed to make any successor feel hopelessly inadequate. In every portrait, she held white roses. The late Countess was accomplished in all the feminine arts, Henderson said, his voice warming for the first time. She played the harp beautifully, spoke 3 languages, and had the voice of an angel. His lordship commissioned a new portrait every year of their marriage. There were to have been many more. The implication hung heavy that Eleanor's death was a tragedy, while Theodora's existence was merely an inconvenience. "She was very beautiful," Theodora said quietly. "Beautiful in spirit as much as form," Henderson continued. "The village still speaks of her charity, her kindness to the tenants. She made Lennox Hall a home of warmth and grace." And now it was a mausoleum, Theodora thought, but did not say. Instead, she simply nodded and asked to see the gardens. The walled garden, when Henderson reluctantly led her to it, proved even more melancholy up close. The gate groaned on rusted hinges as he pushed it open, revealing what had once been a rose garden of extraordinary beauty. Climbing roses had overgrown their trellises and collapsed in tangled masses. Paths disappeared under weeds. A small fountain stood dry and cracked, its cherub statue stained green with neglect. Yet beneath the decay, the bones of something magnificent remained. "This was Lady Eleanor's particular project," Henderson said, his voice rough with emotion. "She designed every aspect herself, imported specimens from France and Italy. She spent hours here each day, tending the roses with her own hands. After her death, his lordship ordered it locked. He cannot bear to see it, but neither can he bear to have it destroyed. So it simply dies slowly," Theodora murmured, running her fingers over a rose cane thick as her wrist, feeling the thorns that could still draw blood despite years of neglect. "How very sad." "His lordship preferred it remain as her memorial," Henderson said stiffly. Theodora said nothing more, but as they returned to the house, her mind turned over possibilities. Here was something she might do, not to erase Eleanor's memory, but to honor it. Not to replace the First Lady Lennox, but to preserve what she had created. That afternoon, she composed a careful note to her husband, requesting permission to restore the garden as a proper memorial to Lady Eleanor. She emphasized that she would change nothing of the original design, merely revive what decay had claimed. She sent it via Henderson and waited. The response came at dinner, or rather the lack of response. Henderson delivered a brief message that his lordship was engaged with estate business and could not be disturbed. The implication was clear. Her request was not important enough to warrant even a refusal. Theodora ate her solitary meal, wrote another cheerful lie of a letter to her mother, and retired to her chambers feeling more isolated than she had ever felt in her life. Yet that night, she dreamed not of drowning in roses, but of bringing them back to life. The days acquired a pattern, each one virtually indistinguishable from the last. Theodora woke, breakfasted alone, occupied herself with reading in the library during times she knew Garrett used his study, walked the grounds under Martha's watchful chaperoning, and retired early to write letters that grew increasingly difficult to keep optimistic. She saw her husband perhaps twice per week, and then only in passing, a nod in the corridor, a brief acknowledgement at dinner on the rare occasions he chose to use the dining room. He spoke to her only when absolutely necessary, and then with such frigid politeness that she might have been a distant acquaintance rather than his wife. 3 weeks into her marriage, Theodora received word that her mother's health had worsened. The physician in Bath recommended she visit at her earliest convenience. Theodora requested an audience with Garrett through Henderson. The butler returned with a note written in her husband's decisive hand. "Make whatever arrangements you require. Henderson will see that you have funds and appropriate escort. I trust your journey will be safe." No expression of sympathy. No offer to accompany her. Simply permission granted and arrangements delegated, as though she were a servant requesting leave. Theodora departed the next morning, accompanied by Martha and 2 grooms. She did not see her husband before leaving. He sent no message, nothing to suggest her absence would be noted or her return anticipated. Bath offered the bittersweet comfort of her mother's presence, despite the woman's obvious decline. Mrs. Winfield lay in a clean but modest set of rooms in a respectable house catering to invalid ladies of reduced circumstances. "My darling girl," her mother whispered, her once beautiful face now gaunt with illness. "You came." "Of course I came, Mama," Theodora said, taking those fragile hands in her own. "I will always come when you need me." "Are you happy, Theodora?" her mother asked, her faded blue eyes searching her daughter's face. "Tell me the truth, child. I am beyond the need for comforting lies." Theodora wanted to lie anyway, but looking into those eyes, she found she could not. "I am learning my place, Mama," she said carefully. "Lord Lennox is a gentleman of honor. He provides for me generously. I want for nothing material." "That is not what I asked," her mother replied with the ghost of her former firmness. "Does he treat you kindly? Does he make you feel valued?" "I think," Theodora said slowly, "that he is a man who loved deeply once and cannot imagine loving again. I do not fault him for his grief, Mama. I only wish I knew how to help him carry it." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, my darling, you always had such a tender heart. But you cannot heal someone who does not wish to be healed. Promise me you will not lose yourself trying to save him from his sorrow." "I promise to remember who I am," Theodora said, which was not quite the same thing, but the best she could honestly offer. When Theodora finally departed 3 days later, after sitting vigil through a particularly difficult night, she kissed her mother's forehead with the terrible knowledge that this might be the last time. "Be strong, my love," her mother whispered. "You are worth more than you know. Do not let anyone make you believe otherwise." Theodora carried those words back to Derbyshire like a talisman against the cold reception she knew awaited her return. Lennox Hall looked even more forbidding as her coach approached in the fading light of a grey afternoon. Henderson opened the door with his usual expression of tolerant disapproval, informed her that her chambers had been prepared, and mentioned in passing that his lordship had gone to London on business the day after her departure and was not expected back for another week. Of course he had. The moment she left, removing even the minimal obligation of avoiding her, he had seized the opportunity to escape. The message could not have been clearer. Her presence in his house was something to be endured, her absence a relief to be exploited. Theodora made her way to her chambers and allowed Martha to help her into a warm bath. Only when she was alone did she finally allow herself to cry, for her dying mother, for her cold marriage, for the girl she had been before circumstances forced her to become someone harder and lonelier. But tears accomplished nothing, as she well knew. So she dried her eyes and determined to do the only thing she could do, find purpose in a place that offered her no welcome. The next morning, armed with gardening gloves borrowed from the conservatory and pruning shears from the potting shed, Theodora made her way to the walled garden. If Garrett would not respond to her written request, she would simply act without his permission and accept whatever consequences followed. This was not an attempt to please him. This was an act of reclamation, both of the garden and of herself. If he had confined her to a corner of the house, she would make that corner a place of beauty and purpose, by her own will and for her own sanity. The garden greeted her with the silence of abandonment. Theodora stood at the entrance for a long moment, taking in the magnitude of the task. 3 years of neglect had done considerable damage, but she could work with damaged things. She had learned that skill intimately. She began with the small fountain, clearing away the weeds that choked its base, running her fingers over the cracked marble. The cherub's face, once she cleaned away the grime and moss, revealed surprising gentleness, a baby angel sleeping rather than celebrating, as though even in death Eleanor had thought of the child she lost. It was then that Theodora understood this garden was not merely beautiful. It was a shrine to hope lost, dreams shattered, a future that would never arrive. Eleanor had created this space while pregnant, planning for the child she would never hold, the life she would never live. Theodora found herself crying again, but differently this time. Not for herself, but for the woman whose ghost haunted this house, whose husband still loved her so completely that he could spare no affection for anyone else. She learned to feel the difference between a dead branch and a dormant one, the dry snap under her pruning shears, a small victory. Each evening she soaked her scratched and bleeding hands in salt water, feeling the sharp sting of dozens of tiny thorn wounds, physical proof of her silent purpose. She worked during the hours when the head gardeners were occupied in other parts of the estate, her presence in the walled garden a secret shared only with birds and sky. It was improper work for a countess, but she was not a countess to them, was she? She was merely the intruder. She returned the next day and the next, establishing a routine that gave structure to her otherwise empty days. She spoke to no one about what she was doing, and no one asked. The servants continued to ignore her, and Garrett remained in London. 3 weeks after she began, the garden started to show the bones of Eleanor's design. Paths emerged from under weeds. The fountain, once cleared and filled with fresh water, began to function again with sweet, bubbling music. The roses, ruthlessly pruned back to healthy wood, showed signs of new growth. Before she could question the wisdom of it, Theodora sat down on a stone bench, pulled out the small notebook she carried, and began to write. Not to Garrett this time, but to Eleanor. "Dear Lady Eleanor," she wrote, "I hope you do not mind that I am working in your garden. I am not trying to replace you or claim something that was yours. I simply cannot bear to see something so beautiful die when it could be saved. I think you must have been extraordinary to create something this lovely. I think your husband must have been very blessed to have known you, even for too short a time. I promise I will never try to take your place in his heart. I only hope that perhaps, someday, there might be a small corner of space where I could exist without feeling like an intruder. With respect and admiration, Theodora." She folded the note, tucked it into a gap in the fountain's stonework where it would likely disintegrate with rain and time, and returned to her work. It was a foolish and childish act, writing to a dead woman, but loneliness had rendered her childish in her desperation. What Theodora did not know was that Garrett had returned from London that very afternoon, 3 days earlier than Henderson expected. What she did not know was that he had gone directly to his study, needing the comfort of familiar books and solitude. What she certainly did not know was that from his study window he had a perfect view of the walled garden and had been watching her work there for the past hour. Garrett stood at his study window long after Theodora had left the garden, her figure disappearing into the house with the weary gait of someone who had worked beyond their strength. His first reaction had been a wave of cold fury. How dare she? He had explicitly told her not to alter anything without his permission. The garden, though technically outside, was still Eleanor's creation, still sacred space that he had ordered preserved exactly as she left it. But then, as he watched her, not destroying but caring, not erasing but restoring, the anger melted away, replaced by something he had not felt in 3 years, a genuine and unsettling curiosity. He had not been able to hear what she said, but he had seen her sit, seen her write something, seen her tuck the note into the fountain with such tenderness that it looked almost like a prayer. What had she written? And more importantly, why? The questions nagged at him through dinner. They nagged at him through the evening as he tried and failed to focus on estate accounts. They nagged at him until, moved by an impulse he could not quite name, he found himself walking through the darkened grounds toward the walled garden, a lantern in his hand. The garden looked different at night. The shadows softened the remaining decay, while the moonlight caught on the cleared paths and newly functioning fountain. Someone, Theodora, he supposed, had worked with remarkable skill, understanding the original design well enough to restore rather than redesign. He found the note exactly where he had seen her place it. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it. The words, when he read them, struck him with unexpected force. She was not trying to replace Eleanor. She was not trying to claim anything for herself. She was simply trying to preserve something beautiful, asking nothing in return except the smallest acknowledgement of her existence. The humility of it, the selflessness, the utter lack of demand. It undid something in his chest that had been tightly locked since Eleanor's death. For 3 years, he had told himself that his grief honored his lost wife. For 3 years, he had wrapped himself in mourning-like armor, using it to justify his isolation and coldness. For 3 years, he had insisted that loving Eleanor meant refusing to love anyone else. But standing in this garden, reading words written to his dead wife by his living one, Garrett suddenly wondered if Eleanor would have wanted this. Would she have wanted him to turn their home into a tomb? Would she have wanted him to punish an innocent woman for the crime of not being her? He knew the answer. Eleanor had been many things, but she had never been cruel. She had loved life, loved laughter, loved the idea of home filled with children and warmth. More than that, she would have been appalled at how he had treated Theodora. Garrett refolded the note carefully, returned it to its hiding place, and stood for a long moment in the garden. The fountain burbled softly. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, hunting. Life continued, whether he acknowledged it or not. It was time, he realized, to stop merely existing in the space between death and living. It was time to consider that perhaps honoring Eleanor's memory might mean learning to live again. He returned to the house and sought out Henderson in the butler's pantry. "Henderson," Garrett said without preamble, "I understand Lady Lennox has been working in the rose garden." "Yes, my lord," Henderson replied, his tone carefully neutral, "for some 3 weeks now." "Why did she not seek my permission first?" "She did, my lord. She sent you a note shortly after her arrival, requesting permission to restore the garden as a memorial to the late Countess. You did not respond." Garrett felt heat rise in his face. He had no memory of such a note, but he had left for London almost immediately after Theodora's departure for Bath. "I see," he said quietly. "And has she done any damage to the garden's original design?" "Quite the contrary, my lord," Henderson said, and for the first time, Garrett heard something other than disapproval in the old butler's voice. "She has been remarkably careful to preserve Lady Eleanor's vision while removing the decay that threatened to destroy it entirely. I believe Lady Eleanor herself would have been pleased with the restoration." The admission clearly cost Henderson something. The butler had been devoted to Eleanor, had mourned her loss almost as deeply as Garrett himself. "Has Lady Lennox requested anything from the household in connection with this work?" "No, my lord. She has asked for nothing. She works alone, using tools she found in the potting shed and wearing gloves borrowed from the conservatory." Of course she had not. She had learned that asking him for anything led only to silence or refusal. "Thank you, Henderson," he said finally. "That will be all for tonight." "My lord," Henderson said as Garrett turned to leave, "if I might speak plainly?" Garrett paused. "You may." "Lady Theodora is nothing like Lady Eleanor," the butler said carefully. "She does not play the harp or speak 3 languages or possess Lady Eleanor's ethereal beauty. But in these weeks, I have observed her treating the lowest scullery maid with the same courtesy she shows to myself. I have watched her work in that garden until her hands bleed, asking nothing in return. I have seen her write cheerful letters to her dying mother while holding back tears. She is not Lady Eleanor, my lord. But perhaps that does not mean she is without worth of her own. Garrett nodded slowly, unable to quite meet Henderson's eyes. Thank you for your candor, he managed. I will take your words under advisement. But he did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study, staring at the darkness beyond his window, trying to reconcile the woman he had ignored with the woman Henderson described. Eleanor's portrait hung on his study wall, the last one painted just weeks before her death. She smiled down at him with the serenity that had characterized her life, her hand resting on her swollen belly, her eyes full of hope for the future. I do not know how to do this, he said to the portrait, his voice rough with emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years. I do not know how to stop missing you. I do not know how to be fair to someone else when all I want is to have you back. The portrait offered no answer, but Garrett could imagine what Eleanor would say if she could speak. She would tell him gently but firmly that grief was love with nowhere to go. But that did not mean he had to turn it into a weapon against those who still lived. She would tell him, he suspected, that 3 years was long enough to mourn at the expense of everyone around him. As dawn broke over the Derbyshire hills, Garrett made a decision. He could not undo the damage he had done to Theodora. He could not erase 3 months of coldness and rejection. But perhaps if he was very careful and very patient, he could begin to make amends. It was a small beginning, but it was something. Theodora had just finished breakfast when Henderson appeared with a message that Lord Lennox requested her presence in the library at her earliest convenience. Her heart sank. He must have discovered her work in the garden, must have been furious at her presumption. She dressed carefully, choosing a morning gown of modest design. If he intended to dismiss her, she would face it with as much dignity as she could muster. The library looked exactly as it had on her first day at Lennox Hall, except that Garrett stood not before the fire, but at the window overlooking the east gardens. He turned as Henderson announced her. What she saw in his face was not anger. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like uncertainty, quickly masked behind the familiar reserve. Lady Lennox, he said, using her proper title for the first time in their acquaintance. Thank you for coming. Please sit. She sat, folding her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. Garrett remained standing, but he moved away from the window, closer to where she sat. I owe you an apology, he said without preamble. Theodora blinked, certain she had misheard. My lord. I have treated you with inexcusable coldness since your arrival, he continued. I have made you feel unwelcome in what should be your home. I have ignored your reasonable requests and failed to show you even basic courtesy. This was wrong of me, and I apologize. Theodora sat very still, afraid that if she moved or spoke, this strange dream would dissolve. I understand, Garrett continued, that you have been restoring Eleanor's rose garden. I wish to thank you for the care and respect you have shown in that work. I read the note you left in the fountain. Heat flooded Theodora's cheeks. I did not intend for you to see that, my lord. You were being kind, he interrupted gently. To me, to Eleanor's memory, to a house full of people who had given you no reason to show kindness at all. I am not certain I deserved such consideration, but I am grateful for it nonetheless. Theodora found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. I only wanted to preserve something beautiful that was being lost. You did not overstep, Garrett said. Or rather, if you did, it was an overstep I should have invited weeks ago. I should have shown you the garden myself. I should have told you about Eleanor. I should have treated you like a person rather than an inconvenient necessity. He moved to the chair opposite hers, sitting so that they were at eye level. The gesture felt significant. I cannot promise, he said carefully, that I will suddenly become a devoted husband. I have been locked in grief for 3 years, and that does not dissolve overnight. But I can promise to treat you with the respect and courtesy you deserve. I can promise to acknowledge your presence in this house. I can promise that if you wish to continue your work in the garden, you have my full support and any resources you require. I do not need your resources, my lord, Theodora said quietly. Only your permission. You have that, he assured her, and you have my gratitude. Henderson tells me you have been working until your hands blister. Tomorrow, I will instruct the head gardener to place himself and 2 assistants at your disposal. You will also have funds to purchase any plantings or materials you require. And... He hesitated, and Theodora saw something vulnerable flicker across his features. And I wonder, he continued, if you might permit me to occasionally visit the garden while you work, not to supervise or criticize, but simply to see what Eleanor created being brought back to life. I think perhaps it is time I stopped avoiding it out of pain, and instead appreciated it for the gift it was. Theodora felt tears prick her eyes, but these were different from the tears of loneliness and rejection. These carried something that felt dangerously like hope. You would be very welcome, my lord, she said. It is your garden, after all. No, Garrett said, and now there was definitely warmth in his voice. It is Eleanor's garden. You are its guardian now. I am merely a visitor who hopes for invitation. It was not love. It was not even affection, really. But it was the first crack in the wall Garrett had built around himself. Then you are invited, she said softly, whenever you wish to come. Garrett nodded, rose and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked back at her. Lady Theodora, he said, using her given name for the first time, thank you for your patience, for your kindness, for not giving up on this place or the people in it, even when we gave you every reason to do so. Then he was gone, leaving Theodora alone in the library with a strange new feeling in her chest. Not quite happiness, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like the possibility of eventually becoming happy. Outside the window, the sun broke through clouds that had threatened rain all morning. Theodora took it as a sign. She rose, squared her shoulders, and went to find Martha. There was work to be done in the garden, and for the first time since her arrival, she would do it with her husband's blessing. It was a small victory, but she had learned that small victories were often the most precious kind. The change in Garrett was not dramatic, but it was consistent. He began taking breakfast in the morning room at the same time as Theodora, conversing about neutral topics, the estate, the weather, books they had both read. He asked about her mother's health and seemed genuinely concerned when she reported that Mrs. Winfield's condition continued to decline. In the garden, he appeared once or twice per week, initially standing at a distance and simply observing. Gradually, he moved closer, asking questions about her choices, explaining Eleanor's original intentions for various plantings. His voice, when he spoke of his late wife, carried profound sadness, but also something new, acceptance that she was gone and would not return. She would have liked you, I think, he said one afternoon as they stood by the restored fountain. You have her same patience with growing things, her same respect for beauty. I wish I could have known her, Theodora replied honestly. From everything I have learned, she was remarkable. She was, Garrett agreed. But she was also human, Theodora. I have spent 3 years turning her into a saint in my memory, forgetting that she had flaws and insecurities like anyone else. It is not fair to her, really, to remember only the perfect moments and forget that she could be stubborn and occasionally sharp-tongued when provoked. It was the first time he had acknowledged any imperfection in Eleanor, and Theodora recognized the significance. He was beginning to remember his late wife as a real person rather than an idealized ghost. The household staff, taking their cue from Garrett's changing behavior, gradually warmed to Theodora. Cook began asking her preferences. The housemaids smiled when they passed her in the corridors. Even Henderson unbent enough to ask her opinion on household management matters. 6 weeks after Garrett's apology in the library, Theodora received word that her mother had passed peacefully in her sleep. The news, though expected, struck her with devastating force. Henderson delivered the message while she was at breakfast with Garrett. She read it once, twice, trying to make the words mean something other than what they clearly stated. Then, without a word, she rose and walked blindly toward the door, needing to be alone with her sorrow. Theodora, Garrett's voice stopped her. What is it? My mother, she managed, her voice breaking. She has gone. She expected perfunctory condolences. Instead, he rose and crossed to her side, his hand settling gently on her shoulder. I am deeply sorry, he said, and his voice carried genuine feeling. I know you loved her very much." The kindness, so unexpected, shattered the control Theodora had been struggling to maintain. She found herself sobbing, all the grief and loneliness and fear of the past months pouring out in a torrent she could not contain. And Garrett, who had maintained careful distance for all their acquaintance, pulled her into his arms and let her cry against his chest, one hand stroking her hair with surprising gentleness. "It is well," he murmured. "Let it out. Grief must have its expression, or it turns to poison inside us." He spoke from intimate knowledge. This was a man who understood the weight of loss. He held her through the worst of the storm, offering no empty platitudes, simply the solid presence of another human being who understood. When she finally quieted, exhausted and embarrassed, he led her to a chair and rang for tea. "You will need to arrange the funeral," he said practically once she had composed herself. "I will handle all the details. You need only tell me your preferences, and I will ensure everything is done correctly." "You do not need to trouble yourself, my lord," Theodora said, wiping her eyes. "I can manage." "I am certain you can," Garrett replied. "But you do not have to. Allow me this, Theodora. Allow me to help you bear this burden." And because she was too tired and sad to argue, she did. Over the next days, she learned the extent of Garrett's support. He handled everything: correspondence with the church, arrangements with funeral directors, ensuring her mother would be buried in Bath near her own mother, exactly as Mrs. Winfield had wished, quietly paying for a memorial far more elegant than Theodora could have afforded. More than that, he insisted on accompanying her to Bath for the funeral, standing at her side in the church, supporting her elbow when her legs threatened to give way, holding her hand during the interment with no concern for who might see or gossip. "You were there for her until the very end," he said quietly, as they stood by the fresh grave. "That is a gift beyond price. You sacrificed your own happiness to give her comfort in her final months. Do not let anyone make you doubt that your choice had value." Theodora looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. He was still grieving, still carrying wounds that would likely never fully heal, but he was also capable of compassion, of understanding, of being present for someone else's pain even while carrying his own. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for being here, for not making me face this alone." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, something that looked almost like pain mixed with determination. "You are not alone, Theodora," he said firmly. "You are my wife. For better or worse, we are bound to each other. I have been a poor husband thus far, but I would like to try to become a better one, if you will allow it." Before she could respond, he had turned and guided her back to the coach. But Theodora held those words close through the journey home, examining them from every angle. Not love, certainly. He had loved Eleanor with a completeness that likely left no room for another woman to occupy the same space in his heart. But perhaps something else. Companionship. Partnership. A marriage that was more than a cold transaction. It was more than she had expected when she signed that contract. Perhaps with time it might even be enough. The spring turned to summer, and with it came the full flowering of Eleanor's restored garden. Roses climbed trellises in cascades of pink and white and yellow. The fountain sang its gentle song. Bees hummed among the blooms, and birds nested in the climbing vines. Garrett joined her more frequently now, sometimes working alongside her in companionable silence, sometimes simply sitting on the stone bench and reading while she worked. They spoke of many things: books, politics, estate management, childhood memories, carefully constructing a friendship from the ruins of their disastrous beginning. One evening in late June, they were working together to stake a particularly vigorous climbing rose when Garrett paused, his hand stilling on the trellis. "Theodora," he said carefully, not looking at her, "I wonder if you might answer a question for me." "Of course, my lord." "Sir, when you wrote that note to Eleanor," he continued, still focused on the roses, "you said you hoped there might someday be a small corner of space where you could exist without feeling like an intruder. Do you still feel that way? Like an intruder in your own home?" Theodora considered the question carefully. Honesty seemed important, even if the answer might pain him. "Less so than I did," she said finally. "In these recent months, you have made efforts to include me, to acknowledge my presence. The staff have become warmer, I have been able to make small contributions to the household. I no longer feel quite so invisible." "But," he prompted, hearing what she had not said. "But I am still aware," she continued slowly, "that I am not who you would have chosen. That if circumstances had not forced your hand, you would still be alone here with Eleanor's memory. I do not fault you for that, truly. But I cannot pretend that knowledge does not color everything between us." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he set down the stake he had been holding and turned to face her fully. "You are correct," he said. "If my circumstances had been different, I would not have remarried. I certainly would not have chosen a bride site unseen through a financial arrangement. I would have remained here, slowly turning into a bitter old man who lived only in the past." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a quality she had never heard before, something raw and honest. "But here is what I have come to understand, Theodora. Eleanor is gone. No amount of grief or loyalty or preserved gardens will bring her back. And while I was busy building monuments to her memory, I was making everyone around me miserable, including myself. You did not deserve to walk into that. No one would have." "I knew what I was agreeing to," Theodora said quietly. "I came into this marriage with my eyes open." "Perhaps," Garrett acknowledged, "but knowing something intellectually is different from living the reality. You have shown more grace and patience than I had any right to expect. You have honored Eleanor's memory while carving out your own space. You have transformed this house from a mausoleum back into something resembling a home." He reached out then, taking her dirt-stained hands in his own, heedless of the soil. "I cannot promise you the passionate love Eleanor and I shared," he said. "That was a different time, a different life, and I was a different man. But I can promise you respect, partnership, genuine affection that grows from shared experiences rather than immediate attraction. If you can be content with that, if you can accept a marriage based on companionship rather than grand passion, then I would like to truly try to make this work." Theodora looked down at their joined hands, then up into his grey eyes, seeing sincerity there along with uncertainty. "I can be content with that," she said softly. "I never expected passion, Garrett. I only wanted not to be invisible, to matter to someone, even in some small way." "You matter," he said firmly. "Perhaps not in the way you imagined when you were a girl dreaming of romance. But you matter to this house, to this estate, and increasingly to me. I find I look forward to our conversations. I appreciate your perspective. I value your company. That may not be love, but it is something real and worth building upon." "Then let us build upon it," Theodora replied, squeezing his hands gently. "Let us see what we can create together, even if it is not what either of us originally envisioned." Garrett smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire countenance. Theodora realized with a start that this might be the first time she had seen him truly smile since their marriage began. "Agreed," he said. "Though I warn you, I am still learning how to live again. I may stumble." "Then we will stumble together," Theodora said. "That is what partnerships are for, I believe." They returned to their work, but something had fundamentally shifted between them. The careful distance had been breached, replaced by something warmer and more solid. Not love, not yet, perhaps not ever in the consuming way he had loved Eleanor, but something genuine nonetheless, something worth nurturing, like the roses they tended together. As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Theodora felt something she had not felt since before her father's death. Hope. Not the desperate hope of drowning person grasping at straws, but the quiet, steady hope of someone planting seeds and trusting in eventual harvest. Autumn arrived with its usual pageantry of color and chill. The change in seasons brought changes to Lennox Hall as well. Garrett had begun seeking Theodora's opinion on estate matters, discussing tenant concerns and agricultural decisions with her over breakfast. They had also tentatively begun spending evenings together in the library. Garrett would read aloud while Theodora worked on her embroidery, or they would sit in companionable silence with their separate books, occasionally sharing interesting passages. These quiet evenings became the highlight of Theodora's days. It was during one such evening that Garrett asked with studied casualness, "Have you given any thought to Christmas? I have not celebrated the holiday properly since Eleanor's death, but I wonder if perhaps this year we might consider hosting the family. My sister and her husband, perhaps some of the cousins, make Lenox Hall feel alive again." Theodora looked up from her embroidery, surprised and touched. "I would welcome that very much, though I confess I have little experience hosting large gatherings." "Then we will plan it together," Garrett said simply. "Henderson will assist, and you have proven yourself more than capable of managing complex projects. The Rose Garden is testament to that." "Then let us host Christmas," she agreed. "Let us fill this house with life and laughter. I think it would please Eleanor to know her home was no longer a shrine but a living place again." "I think it would," Garrett agreed quietly. She loved Christmas. The house was always filled with greenery and music, and far too many guests. She would host charity dinners for the tenants and insist I play Father Christmas for the village children, beard and all. He spoke of Eleanor freely now, neither idealizing her nor avoiding her memory entirely. "Then we should do those things," Theodora said. "Perhaps not all at once this year, but we could begin establishing new traditions while honoring the old. Would you be willing to play Father Christmas again?" Garrett actually laughed, a sound so rare and unexpected that Theodora found herself smiling in response. "I suppose I could be convinced," he said. "Though I warn you, my performance 3 years ago was mediocre at best. Eleanor always said I looked more like an irritated bear than a jolly saint." They spent the rest of the evening planning, and Theodora felt a sense of purpose she had not experienced since her mother's death. This house was becoming hers, not in the sense of possession, but in the sense of belonging. Christmas at Lenox Hall surpassed all expectations. Garrett's sister arrived with her jovial husband and 3 exuberant children, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. Cousins came from Somerset and Cornwall, along with several families from the local gentry. The house, so long silent, rang with conversation and laughter. The highlight of the season was the tenants' dinner on Christmas Eve. Theodora had worked with cook to prepare a feast that would feed over 50 people, while Garrett arranged games and prizes for the children. Seeing him don the Father Christmas beard and distribute gifts to wide-eyed village children, Theodora felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and tender that felt dangerously like affection, far deeper than companionable regard. She pushed the feeling aside. They had agreed on partnership, not passion. It would be foolish to want more than what had been promised. But late that night, after the guests had departed and the household had quieted, Garrett found her in the library, staring into the dying fire. "You look pensive," he observed, settling into the chair beside hers. "Are you very tired?" "Pleasantly tired," Theodora replied. "It was wonderful, Garrett. All of it. Thank you for suggesting it." "It was overdue," he said. "This house needs life." Eleanor understood that instinctively. "I think you do as well, in your own way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Garrett spoke again, his voice carrying an odd quality Theodora could not quite identify. "I have been thinking," he began carefully, "about our arrangement, about the terms I set when you first arrived." Theodora's heart sank. Was he about to enforce the 4th term, the one about providing an heir? "I realize," Garrett continued, "that I established those terms from a place of grief and anger, not at you specifically, but at the world that had taken Eleanor and then expected me to simply continue living. The terms were harsh and unkind, and I wonder if you might consent to renegotiating them." "Renegotiate," Theodora repeated carefully. "Yes." He turned to face her more fully. "I would like to propose new terms. First, that we share this house as true partners, making decisions together rather than you requiring my permission for everything. Second, that we present ourselves to society as a united couple, attending functions together if you wish. Third, that we continue to build the friendship we have begun, allowing it to develop naturally without artificial constraints." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was gentle. "I am not seeking to recreate what I lost. That belongs to the past. I am as curious to discover what something new built upon mutual respect could become." This acknowledgement that he was not simply replacing Eleanor but building something entirely different felt significant. And fourth, he continued, regarding the matter of an heir, I will not press you on that matter until and unless you feel comfortable with it. I will not treat you as a broodmare whose only purpose is procreation. If and when we come together, it will be as husband and wife who have chosen to, not as strangers fulfilling a contract. Theodora felt tears prick her eyes, but these were not tears of sadness. You would give me that choice, even though producing an heir is important for the estate? The estate will survive, Garrett said firmly. What matters more to me now is that you feel respected and valued, not used. You deserve better than I have given you, Theodora. I would like to try to provide it. She reached out then, covering his hand with her own. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for considering my feelings, for being willing to try. It is the least I can do, Garrett replied. You have given so much to this house, to this marriage, asking almost nothing in return. It is past time I reciprocated. He stood then, drawing her to her feet as well. But instead of releasing her hand, he lifted it to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers in a gesture far more intimate than their usual polite distance. Good night, Theodora, he said softly. Sleep well. Tomorrow we begin again, on better terms than before. Good night, Garrett, she replied, her heart beating faster than usual. And thank you for everything. After he left, Theodora remained by the dying fire for a long time, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. The gesture had been chaste, proper by any standard, yet it had carried more genuine affection than she had experienced from him in all their months of marriage. Perhaps, she thought, there was hope for something more after all. Winter in Derbyshire could be brutal, and late January brought a blizzard that buried the countryside in snow and ice. Theodora had been reading in her chambers when Henderson appeared with word that the library chimney was smoking badly. The drawing-room fire had been deemed unsafe as well, leaving only the morning room and Garrett's study with functioning hearths. His lordship has suggested, Henderson said with careful neutrality, that you might join him in the library despite the smoke, as he has opened the windows to air it out. He thought you might prefer company to sitting alone in the cold. It was an olive branch, an invitation to share space that had once been his exclusive domain. She gathered her book and a warm shawl and made her way to the library, where she found Garrett had indeed opened the windows despite the frigid air. This is madness, she said, laughing despite herself. We will both catch our deaths. Probably, Garrett agreed, adding another log to the sputtering fire. But at least we will do so together rather than separately freezing in our respective chambers. They settled as close to the fireplace as possible, wrapped in heavy blankets. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about childhood winters and favorite books, about estate matters and philosophy. At some point, Garrett shifted closer to better share his blanket, and Theodora found herself leaning against his shoulder, drawn by his warmth and the comfort of his solid presence. This is nice, she murmured, half asleep from the fire's warmth. It is, Garrett agreed, and there was something in his voice that made her look up at him. He was gazing down at her with an expression she had never seen before, something soft and wondering. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Theodora, he said quietly, I find myself in rather unexpected territory. Oh? Her voice came out breathless. I had convinced myself that I was incapable of feeling anything beyond grief, he continued. That Eleanor had taken my capacity for love with her when she died, but lately I find myself looking forward to seeing you each morning. I find excuses to be in your company. I find myself thinking about you when we are apart, wondering if you are well, if you are happy. His thumb traced her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I am not certain what to call this feeling, he admitted. It is different from what I felt for Eleanor. Less consuming, perhaps, but no less real. More like a steady flame than a wildfire, but it is there, Theodora, and it is growing stronger each day. Theodora's breath caught. She had not dared hope for this. I feel it too, she whispered. I tried not to. I promised myself I would not burden you with expectations, But somewhere between the garden and these quiet evenings and your kindness when my mother died, I found myself falling in love with you." Garrett's eyes closed briefly, as though her words pained him. When he opened them again, they glistened with unshed tears. "I do not deserve you," he said roughly. "After how I treated you, you deserve a chance to heal," Theodora interrupted gently. "You deserve to live again, Garrett. Eleanor would want that for you." "I know," he said. "I am beginning to understand that, and if you are willing, if you can be patient with me as I learn to navigate these feelings, I would very much like to try, to build something real with you, to be the husband you deserve rather than the ghost I have been." "I am willing," Theodora said simply. "I have been willing all along." The kiss, when it finally came, was tender and seeking, a question asked and answered. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving beneath the grief." "Always," Theodora replied. "We save each other, I think. That is what love does." They remained in the library long after the chimney had stopped smoking, wrapped together against the cold, talking softly about the future they might build. Spring returned to Lenox Hall, and with it came the blooming of Eleanor's garden once more. But this year Theodora did not work alone. Garrett joined her regularly, their partnership in the garden reflecting the partnership they had built throughout the house. One morning in early May, as they worked together to train new rose canes onto trellises, Garrett paused and looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "I have something to confess," he said quietly. "Oh?" Theodora kept her hands busy with the roses. "I have fallen in love with you," he said simply. "I did not intend to. I did not think myself capable of it after Eleanor, but somewhere between your restoration of this garden and your restoration of my ability to feel anything beyond grief, it happened. I love you, Theodora, not as I loved Eleanor. That was a different kind of love, belonging to a younger man in a different life. But I love you as you are here and now for your patience and kindness and strength." Theodora's hands stilled on the rose canes. She looked up at him, searching his face. She found only sincerity. "You do not have to say it back," Garrett continued quickly. "I simply wanted you to know, you deserve to know that you are loved, genuinely and completely, for exactly who you are." But Theodora was already moving toward him, closing the distance between them. When she reached him, she lifted her hands to frame his face. "You foolish man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you think I do not love you as well? I have loved you for months now, watching you heal, watching you learn to live again. I love your mind and your dry humor and the gentleness you show when you forget to be guarded. I love how you speak of Eleanor, without either idealizing her or forgetting her. I love that you made space for me in your life, even when it cost you to do so." Garrett's arms came around her then, pulling her close with a fierce tenderness. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his lips a breath away from hers. "Properly, I mean, as a husband who loves his wife." "Please," Theodora whispered. The kiss, when it came, was everything she had not known she needed. It was gentle but not timid, passionate but not overwhelming. It tasted of hope and healing, of new beginnings built on the foundations of old sorrows overcome. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "I cannot promise this will be easy," he murmured. "I am still learning how to be a proper husband. I may still have days when Eleanor's memory weighs heavily, but I can promise that I will try every day to be worthy of you." "And I cannot promise to be the perfect countess," Theodora replied. "I am still learning, still making mistakes. But I can promise that I will love you through all of it, the easy days and the difficult ones." "Then we shall learn together," Garrett said, pressing another kiss to her lips, "as we have been doing all along." They stood together in Eleanor's garden, surrounded by blooming roses that Eleanor had planted and Theodora had saved, and it felt like a benediction. Not the ending of Eleanor's story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one that honored the past while embracing the future. That night, for the first time since their marriage, Theodora did not retire to her solitary chambers in the East Wing. Instead, with Henderson's discreetly approving smile and Martha's delighted tears, She moved her belongings to the Countess's chambers that adjoined Garrett's own rooms. They came together as husband and wife with tender care, learning each other with patience and genuine affection. There was no pretense that this was a passionate whirlwind romance. Instead, it was something rarer and perhaps more valuable. A love chosen deliberately, built through adversity, strengthened by mutual respect. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Garrett spoke quietly. "I want you to know," he said, "that I do not compare you to Eleanor when we are together like this. You are entirely yourself, and I love you for who you are, not as a replacement for who I lost." "I know," Theodora replied, running her fingers through his hair. "I trust that now. It took time, but I understand that you have room in your heart for both of us, for her memory and for my presence." "The heart is miraculous that way," Garrett agreed. "It can hold more than we imagine if we let it." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of loss or loneliness. Instead, they dreamed of spring gardens and shared laughter, and a future they would build together. 2 years had passed since that spring morning when Garrett had confessed his love among the roses. Theodora stood in their garden, for she had begun to think of it as theirs now, watching her husband play with their son. Little Edmund, named after Garrett's father, toddled among the rose bushes with the fearless determination of a child who had never known anything but love. At 15 months old, he was the image of his father, with the same dark hair and grey eyes, though he had inherited Theodora's stubborn chin. "Careful, Edmund," Garrett called as the child reached for a thorny cane. "Those roses bite, remember?" "Bite," Edmund repeated gleefully. Theodora laughed, settling her hand on her swelling belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy had been planned and welcomed. Garrett had been attentive throughout, almost comically concerned with her welfare. "Are you happy?" Garrett asked, coming to stand beside her while Edmund investigated a particularly interesting beetle. "Very," Theodora replied honestly. "Are you?" "Beyond what I thought possible," Garrett said, slipping his arm around her waist. "When you arrived here in the rain 2 years ago, I thought my life was over. I was simply going through the motions, fulfilling duties without hope or joy. You changed everything, Theodora. You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back to life," Theodora corrected. "I was drowning too in my own way. You gave me purpose, a home, a family. You taught me that sometimes the best things in life are not the ones we planned for, but the ones we build from circumstances we did not choose." They stood together, watching their son discover the world, feeling the promise of another child between them. Life had returned to Lenox Hall. The smiles of the servants, the prosperity of the tenants, and even Henderson's open devotion to young Edmund were proof of it. "I still think of her sometimes," Garrett said quietly, nodding toward Eleanor's portrait in the gallery. "But not with pain anymore, just with gratitude for what we shared and acceptance of what was lost. Does that seem strange?" "Not at all," Theodora replied. "Love does not diminish because we find it again with someone else. Your love for Eleanor does not lessen your love for me. They exist side by side, each perfect in its own way." "Wise words from a wise woman," Garrett murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How did I become so fortunate as to marry you?" "Debt, desperation, and a business arrangement," Theodora replied with a smile. "The least romantic beginning imaginable." "And yet," Garrett said, turning her to face him, "it led to the most profound love I have known. Not the easiest love, certainly, but the one that taught me the most about resilience, patience, and the human capacity for healing." Edmund toddled over then, demanding attention. Garrett scooped him up, settling the child on his hip while keeping his other arm around Theodora. "I have commissioned a portrait," Garrett said, "of the 3 of us, soon to be 4, here in the garden. I want to remember this exactly as it is, imperfect, joyful, real. A family that chose each other, even when we did not initially have that choice." Theodora felt tears prick her eyes, but these were happy tears. "That sounds perfect," she whispered. As the sun began to set over Lenox Hall, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that matched the blooms surrounding them, the small family made their way back to the house. Behind them, the garden stood as testament to love's ability to endure, transform, and bloom again, even after the harshest winters. And in the portraits that would hang in the gallery, Eleanor's dozen canvases and this new one of Theodora's family, future generations would see not tragedy followed by replacement, but the beautiful complexity of the human heart, its capacity to love deeply, to grieve honestly, and ultimately to heal and love again. Thank you for staying with us through Theodora and Garrett's journey. If this story of patience, healing, and love earned through adversity touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late for new beginnings. Your support helps us continue creating stories that celebrate resilience, hope, and the transformative power of genuine love.